Hashem, today's daf yomi is Shevuos daf Kuf Dalet, Shevuos 24, but we're going to start on the bottom of 23b. We're going to start around 11 lines from the bottom, or maybe 12 lines from the bottom, that the Gemara has established that, the Gemara is going to start, there was a line in the Mishnah that says, the Gemara says, Ha gufa kasha, there's an internal contradiction. Now, one line in the Mishnah said, Shevuos shelo ochel, if you take an oath that you're not going to eat, va'achal ochel she'em re'uyin la'achila, and you drank food that's not edible, v'shasa mashkin she'em re'uyin l'shtia, and you ate food that's not edible. What do we mean by not edible? Meaning not kosher food, or you drink liquid that's not kosher, potter, you're exempt. So one line in the Mishnah says, if you ate food that's not, you took an oath that you're not going to eat, and then you ate food that's not kosher, you're exempt from violating a false oath because the false oath does not apply to that. But then it says another line, but the next line says that if you take an oath you're not going to eat and then you eat these foods that are not kosher, you're liable. So why is there a distinction? Maishna Reisha, the Pater, Maishna Sefer the Chayev. Why in the first cause are you exempt and in the second cause are you liable? So the Gemara says, Hello, Kasha. It's not difficult. Why? Reisha b'stam v'seifa b'mefarish. So the Gemara says that the first cause is where you didn't specify anything, and we'll see what that means. And the second cause is where you specified, I'm going to eat an amount, and that amount is less than an olive-sized portion. When the Torah says you can't eat non-kosher food, it means an olive-sized amount of it. So in the concluding clause, it's where you specified less than that amount, and so therefore you're liable because the oath will take effect. So then the Gemara says, wait 1 second. Mefarish nami gufi tikshi. This is also itself a question because amai mushba me'ar Sinai. Why would the oath take effect? You already swore. You have your coffee? Where's your coffee? What are you looking for? Here, Shia, grab a Gemara, Shia behind you. Oh yeah, here. So the Gemara says, why is it the case even at first? You had already taken an oath at Sinai. So the Gemara says, the reason why it takes effect is Rav Shmuel Rabbi Yochanan the Amrei B'Kol Dvarim Hamutarim and Dvarim Ha'isurim. This is what Rav Shmuel and Rabbi Yochanan say here, is where you included in the oath things that are otherwise permitted with things that are prohibited. Meaning to say you took an oath about not eating the non-kosher food, but you also at the same time took an oath about eating kosher food. And so since the oath took effect on the kosher food, it also included the non-kosher food. This is called the prohibition of koel. We'll see more about that in today's daf. And so therefore it applies, even though you had already taken an oath at Sinai. Whereas Reish Lakish says, the only way you have this case is according to the Rabbanan who say the oath only takes effect on an olive-sized amount, because here in this case, it's where you specified specifically that it's less than an olive-sized amount. And so therefore the oath takes effect because you're only warned about an olive-sized amount from Sinai, or if you don't specify, according to Rabbi Akiva, who says the oath takes effect even on any amount of food. The Amar Adam Oser Atom Bekolshu. So the Gemara says, okay. Bishlama Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Yochanan says the way the oath takes effect is by an Easter Koel, where it includes more areas. He doesn't follow Reish Lakish's position, the Muki Lala Masnisa Kedivrei HaKol, because he wouldn't say our Mishnah does not follow a minority opinion, but it follows Divrei HaKol, it follows every opinion, which is everybody's position, which is that it goes according to not just the Rabbanim, but also to Rabbi Akiva. So therefore, he doesn't want to adopt Reish Lakish's approach. Elo Reish Lakish, my time Rabbi Yochanan. Why does Reish Lakish not follow the position of Rabbi Yochanan? So Reish Lakish would say, Ki Amrinan Easter Koel. When we say this concept of Easter Koel, and that's what we're going to talk about now on top of 24a, the Easter Abame Ela, where it comes on its own. But where you make the prohibition, we don't say it. What's this prohibition of Easter Kola that comes on its own? Rashi tells us what it means. So, for example, let's say you eat a nevela, you eat a non-kosher animal, an animal that wasn't slaughtered properly, you eat it on Yom Kippur. So how many prohibitions are you in violation of? How many sin offerings do you have to bring? So that's a dispute between the rabbis and the Rabbanon, where the Rabbanon and Rabbi Shimon, between the Rabbanon and Rabbi Shimon, that the Rabbanon say that you're going to have to, the Rabbanon say that you will bring two sin offerings, one for eating a non-kosher animal and one for eating on Yom Kippur. Whereas whereas Rabbi Shimon would say, no, you can't have a prohibition of falling upon another prohibition. So there isn't a second sin offering for eating on Yom Kippur if you've already, because it was already prohibited. But the Rabbanan say, no, prior to Yom Kippur, you were only prohibited to eat the non-kosher animal. So now Yom Kippur includes more prohibitions, because now there's also a prohibition against eating a kosher animal on Yom Kippur. And so therefore they have two. And so therefore, since there's an additional prohibition on Yom Kippur, therefore we're going to say that this prohibition applies as well on Yom Kippur. And so therefore you have two sin offerings according to the Rabbanan. But that's a prohibition that comes on its own, but it's not something that you made. So Rish Lakish says Easter Kol, according to the Rabbanan, works why a prohibition comes on its own, but not that something that you make. And in this case, by you taking the oath, you're making it. We're on the top of 24a. So the Gemara says, Bishlam Rish Lakish Mishum Halchi Kapata Rabbi Shimon. Well, Rabbi Shimon in that case says Easter Koel. It makes sense according to Rish Lakish, who says that if you take the oath, unless then a shear, Mishum Halchi Kapata Rabbi Shimon. This is the reason why Rabbi Shimon is going to say you're exempt. The Tanya Rabbi Shimon Omer Kol Shu Lamakos. Rabbi Shimon says so. Going back again, Rish Lakish says that the case of our Mishnah where you're going to be liable is where he says, according to the Rabbanon, if you're mefarish, if you say it's any amount, if you say, let's say, I swear I'm not going to eat a morsel of bread, and so therefore the Rabbanon will say you're liable, but Rabbi Shimon will say that you're exempt. Why? Because Rabbi Shimon says kol shu makos. Rabbi Shimon says any amount to be liable for lashes. But the only time we say that you need a kazayis is with respect to a carbon. And so therefore, even the idea that you're not going to eat a morsel, that was also prohibited from Mount Sinai. Rabbi Shimon says, even from Sinai, we're prohibited to eat even a morsel. And so therefore, you can't take an oath even against a morsel. El Rabbi Yochanan, my time at Rabbi Shimon de Pater. What's the reason why Rabbi Shimon says you're exempt, even if you take an oath about something that was prohibited from Mount Sinai? Midi, Dihu, Daima, isn't the reason why the rabbis say you're liable Mishum Easter Koel? So the Gemara's answer is, don't the rabbis say that the prohibition is because that the rabbis say you're liable and because it's concept of Easter Koel? Rabbi Shimon Tamei. Rabbi Shimon says delay slay Easter Koel. He doesn't agree with this concept, so he'll say you're exempt because he doesn't agree with this concept of Easter Koel. He say if it's already prohibited, you can't have another prohibition. The Tanya Rabbi Shimon says, and this is the example I just spoke about. Rabbi Shimon Omer, let's say we eat this non-kosher animal on Yom Kippur, this carcass, Potter. He says you're exempt. The rabbi said you're liable because since there's another prohibition on the food, therefore we're going to have the original prohibition kick in as well. But Rabbi Shimon says you're exempt. He doesn't accept the prohibition of koel. So also in this case, if you take an oath even on any amount, according to Rabbi Shimon, the oath will not take effect. And any amount of non-kosher food, it won't take effect, and you're going to be exempt for violating the oath. So the Gemara says, Bishlamol reish lakis mishkachas la belavahain. So now we have a different concept that we said in order for an oath to take that we say that this oath is you only bring a korban, you only bring the sacrifice for violating the oath only if the oath can be something that has both a positive and negative, like I will eat or I will not eat. So. And because it says in the verse la ro'e tave, so I mean something and its opposite, and so therefore a person who's mefaresh can say it could work according to Reish Lakish because he could say I'll take an oath that I will not eat a half of olive size of bread, and also I will not eat a half of a carcass, and basically I'll not eat a half of a nevela. And so therefore, or he says, I will eat a half a nevela. But according to Rabbi Yochanan, who says that it is complete amount, and it's the reason why it's prohibited is because of Mishum Koel, because it's more inclusive. And so therefore, so we can work according to Rish Lakish. Bishlam Rish Lakish Mishkachas La B'Lavain El Rabbi Yochanan Bishlam Olav Mishkachas. So I understand where he says I'm not going to eat nevela, so it'll take effect, because he says I'm not going to eat this non-kosher food, and it takes effect because let's say on Yom Kippur. Elahain, but where can you have this concept that he takes an oath to eat nevelos and shlutos? Is it take effect that it will fall, that'll fall on the that the oath will take effect on the carcass and nullify what we said at Sinai? So the Gemara says, Elahain echam shkachasla ela kedarava the Amarava. So therefore, the Gemara says we have to reverse what we said earlier, and we say that So the Gemara says what we're talking about here is like Rava said, that what are you talking about? That what's the case that we say you're liable, where he takes Shevuos lo ochel v'achol afar pater. So therefore, both. So what does Rava say? Both in the first clause and in the second clause, one case we say you're exempt, in one case you say we're liable. We're talking about a case where he said he doesn't say anything about a carcass. He says he takes an oath that he's not going to eat. And why did it say in the first clause do we say that he's exempt, and why in the second case do we say he's liable? Only because what happened was he ate food that you don't typically eat, that's not edible. It's not that it's not kosher, but food that's not edible. Like Rava said, Shevuos lo ochel v'achol afar pater. And let's say you take an oath that you're not going to eat, and then you ate earth. And so therefore, since he ate earth is not food, and so therefore he's going to be exempt. And so when our Mishnah says that you took an oath that you're not going to eat, you're exempt, that's talking about you ate food that's not edible, like earth. But if you indeed had eaten the nevelos, then it would have implied, and you would be liable, because it implied the kosher food and the non-kosher food to be liable. So according to Rabbi Yochanan, it always takes effect on the nevelos, because when he says lo ochel, he implies kosher and non-kosher food. And so when are you going to be exempt? Only if you ate earth, because that's not edible food. So Amar Mari Afana Namitinino. We also learned this in the Mishnah that carcass, if you eat nevela, you're going to be liable, because the regular oath, according to Rabbi Yochanan, includes it. Why? Because it says in the Mishnah on 22b, Konim ishti nesli imachalti ayom. You take a vow that my wife cannot benefit from me if I eat anything today. And then you eat these carcasses or this non-kosher food, his wife has prohibited him. So we see that even though he says, I'm not going to eat, it includes the food that's not kosher but is edible. Gemara says, the two cases are totally different. Why? Hasam, even the meikara achal, v'hadar ishtableis. No, there in that case, since at first he had eaten these non-kosher foods, and then he took a vow against it, and he says that my wife has prohibited to me like these non-kosher foods. So therefore, it's obviously the case that is his thought process was on it. Chashuvi achshavei, because he said that this is like a food to me, but elahachami achshavei. Here, we don't know that he's considering it food, so it's not a proof from that point. So now we go back to the concept of Easter Kol on the top of 24b. There's a difference between Easter Kolel and Easter Mosif. Easter Mosif is different than Easter Kol. Easter Kolel is where the day itself has more inclusive prohibitions that are applying to it. Isur Mosif is where the item itself has additional actions, additional reasons why the item itself is prohibited. Like, for example, a piece of meat that is not kosher meat, but then is also expired meat before it can be brought on the korban. So there, the item itself is Isur Mosif. So this is an additional way, and it's not the same as Isur Kolel, and that's what the Gemara is going to say now in this point. So the Gemara says, Amarava, my taima, demand Islay Isur Kolel. What's the reason for the one who says, i.e. the position of the Rabbanan, that if there's this concept of Isur Kolel, if there's an additional prohibition on the day, then the original prohibition, which was already prohibited, will apply also on that day, like in the case of non-kosher food on Yom Kippur, because midei dahavia Isur Mosif, the same logic that applies to an Isur Mosif, where the item itself had an additional prohibition, meaning to say, because the final Isur that comes on it also applies, therefore the initial one also applies. Uman deleisle, and the one who does not say Isur Koel, he says, Ki Amar Isur Mosif, Bahada Chaticha, B'shtei Chatichos Lo Amrinan. He'll say, when do we say Isur Mosif? When do we say there's additional prohibition on the item? By that same piece of meat. But by two separate pieces of meat, we wouldn't say it. We wouldn't say because there's a prohibition on this one piece of meat, there's a prohibition on a second piece of meat, and that would be the comparison, the comparable to the Isur Koel. The Amarava, Raman the Islay Isur Koel. So Rava says, according to the one who says that we say this concept of Isur Koel, Amar, let's say a person says Shevuos shelo ochel te'enim. Let's say a person says, if I take an oath that I'm not going to eat. Here, he'll join us. Grab a Gemara over there behind you. So let's say a person says, I takes an oath that I'm not going to, so according to one who says we say this concept of Isur Koel, if a person takes an oath that he's not going to eat a fig or figs, so now he says, I'm not going to eat figs and grapes. Now we have a general concept that once you take an oath on one item, and you can't make a second oath on that item. That second oath doesn't take effect. But now this oath is more inclusive because it's not just on the figs; it's also on the grapes. Since the second oath also applies to grapes, it will also apply. Since the second oath applies to grapes, it will also apply to the figs again. And then if you eat the figs, you're in violation of two oaths. You're in violation. Have a good day, Eitan. Do you remember the schedule?
Yes.
Oh, yeah, so you're back on Thursday or something? By the way, the senior trip, please, everybody behave properly. Please make us proud. Oh, no, your teachers won't allow it. No, your teachers won't allow it. They'll be like, no, it's not allowed. Okay. I'm not joking. That's what they say to you. Okay, so the Gemara says, "Midu d'chayil anavim chayil nami ate'enim." So the Gemara says, "Pshita." What's obvious? That is exactly what koel is, because it applies to an additional item. Then also on the earlier one, it applies. The Gemara says, "No." You might have thought Isur habame lav amrina. We might have said, "No, this is a prohibition that you bring upon yourself," meaning to say, when do we say Isur koel? Only when the Isur comes from the day itself, like Yom Kippur, you had nothing to do with it. But Isur Abame Atzmo, but where the person himself makes the oath, Lo Amrinan, we might have thought we don't say it on that case. Kamash Mala, and therefore Rav is teaching us that when it comes to Isur Koel, we don't draw a distinction between the prohibition that comes on its own and the prohibition that comes because of something you said. The Gemara says, Meisiv Rava Brei de Rava. So Rava, the son of Rava, challenges this. So the Gemara is now going to bring this idea that Rava just said, that you say koel even if the prohibition comes from its own. This idea, Rava, the son of Rava, challenges this chiddush that Rava said, because it says in Krishus, in the Mishnah in Krisus, Yesh ochel achila achas v'chayav aleh arba chatos, that if somebody can sometimes eat one one size amount of food, and he'll be liable for 4 sin offerings. V'asham echad. A guy can do 5 karbanos. He eats one piece of food. He puts one piece of food in his mouth, and he has to do 5 karbanos as a result of it. 4 sin offerings and 1 asham. And Eluain, this is what you did. How did you do it? You're tamei. You're not ritually pure. Sha'achol chelev. You ate this non-kosher meat. Vuno, sir, the meat was expired. It was kachim. It was expired. Min hamukdashin b'yom kippurim, and you did it on Yom Kippur. So what did you do? Why are you liable for? You have to bring a chatas for eating the chelev, non-kosher meat, for eating the nose or the expired. You have to do it because it's on Yom Kippur, and also because you're tamei that ate kachim, and you have to bring an asham because that's me'ilah, because you trespassed on temple property. So that's 5. And that's all because of what we say, this concept of Isser Kol, where Meir says, Rabbi Meir is of the position, Afim Shabbos. Rabbi Meir says also, you can also have to bring in a different one, an additional one, if you put this food in your mouth on Shabbos and you carried it out, Votzio Chayiv. Then you're going to say there's an additional one, additional sin offering. Amrulo, no. Ain't shame. That you're not liable for eating, you're liable for carrying. So the rabbis don't count it. But now the Gemara says, let's go back to Rava's point that if it comes on its own, it's not an Isser Koel. Vim Isa, and if like Rava says that Isser Koel is only even where you bring it on your own. So if that's the case, Mishkachat Chamesh, we could have an additional one. Could go in Shamar Shevuos Shalochot Tamarim V'Chelev. Let's say you had taken an oath. We could have an additional case where we'd say, I take an oath that I'm not going to eat dates and this chelev, this non-kosher food. And then you could have an additional oath for eating the chelev, since it's liable, you're liable for eating the tamarim, you're also liable for eating the chelev. And so therefore you had 6. You'd have to bring 6 chatos in that case. So the Gemara is going to give 6 answers why this doesn't apply. So the first answer number 1 is Ki Katani Isra Bami Elav. What's our Mishnah talking about? Our Mishnah is only talking about the prohibitions that come on their own. But Isra Bami Atzmo Lo Katani. But it's not talking about the prohibitions where you bring it with your own actions. So that's what the Gemara is saying. So that's the first answer. The Mishnah is only talking about Isra Bami Elav, but not Isra Bami Atzmo. Gemara says, what about a hektish? Hektish is a prohibition that you brought about on your own. The Gemara says, no. The Gemara says the Mishnah increases talking about a hektish, a sacred item which came on its own. That was a firstborn animal, which is sacred from the womb. Number 2, a second answer. You could say, why does he? The reason why it doesn't include an oath is because an oath you could go to the Chacham and undo the oath. But an oath which you could have undone by asking about it was not mentioned. But what about Varei Hektish? What about, can't you undo the consecration of an item? No, we already said we're talking about a firstborn animal, so it doesn't apply. Answer number 3, Answer number 3 is Ki Katani, and we said this obligation of 5 obligations, that is Karban Kavua. That's where it's a fixed sacrifice, the Chatos and an Asham. But this case here of an oath, that's not a fixed sacrifice. That's a Karban O of the Oreid. That's a variable offering, so therefore it's not included in the category. Look, Tani. The Gemara says, it's a Kodesh. Karban O of the Oreid who? But what about the fact is that a Tameh who eats the Kodesh, that is also Karban O of the Oreid? The Gemara says, no, the Karban O, the Gemara says, Benasi, it's a king, the Rebbe Elazar, the Amar Nasi, may be sire. Now, according to the position of Rebbe Eliezer and Arios, who says a Nasi who's tamei and he eats kachim, he always brings a goat as a sin offering and not a carbon oil of the Orient. 4th answer is Rav Ashi Amar Kikatani Midi Dechayli Kashiur. This is an amount that you have to eat an owl-sized amount. That's what our Mishnah is referring to. But Shvua Dechayli Apachos Mishiur Lo Katani. But Shvua, which applies even if it's less than an owl-sized amount, it doesn't list it. But what about, it says a hektish, and a hektish we had said even that you're liable even if it's less than an olive size amount. Yeah, but even though it's less than an olive size amount, but it is a shear, haba'inon shavam mipruta. It has to be at least a penny's worth. Fifth case, Rav Ashi may avir. Yo, that's a strange place. Like Rashi says it's the name of a place. There's a place in France called the Evro, but I never heard it before. And Rav Ashi was the last generation. Rav Ashi may avir. Yeah. Amar Rabbi Zera, Kikotani, what's the reason why our Mishnah doesn't list it? When our Mishnah lists this, that's dono kares. That our Mishnah is listing no cases where if you did it intentionally, you'd get kares. But dono lav or katani. But the oath, if you violate the oath, you don't get kares. It's just a prohibition. Gemara says Varei Asham just dono lav. What about the case of Asham, where if you violated it's just a prohibition? Katani. Gemara says bechatas kaminim. That which we said that it has to be kares, that's only by the chatas, but not by the asham. Okay, and now we go up to the sixth case. Ravina, are on top of 25a. Kikatani mide dechayel amide debarachilu. When we say that it applies, it's something that is to something that's able to be eaten. But Shevuos dechayli amide delabrachilu. But an oath applies even to those things that are not capable of being eaten, and so therefore lo katani. Gemara says, what about Ari Hektish? Dechayel nami ha'etzem havana. But Hektish can be made even on wooden stones. The Gemara says, al kikatani dechayel amide d'isbei mashasha. No, something that has tangibility. Shevuos dechayel amide d'leisba mashasha. Could go in Ishan or Shloishan Lokatani. The oath applies even those things that don't have tangibility, like an oath that I'm not going to sleep or that I'll sleep. Therefore, thank you, Bill. So therefore, it's a different category. Okay, so there we see 6 cases, and we'll start with the Mishnah, God willing, tonight. And tomorrow morning we'll do the Mishnah on the top of 25a. A big shikoyach to everybody for today's beautiful day.
Thank you.
Tonight, 7:30.